No, let's have at it.
All right, dude. Well, thanks again for coming on. Third time on the Former Action Guys podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's been cool watching your page grow too. Like you're really like making some or making some headway on Instagram and stuff. Doing your kit iterations and stuff like that, and you've got your YouTube channel and everything as well. And you've also started a company, and I like to get into all that. So I originally asked you to come on because we were supposed to, we got invited to. Well, let's start off like this. General Bellin, I want to tell him thanks for the invite to the event in Washington D.C. I was unable to make it. I am very upset with American Airlines. I may never fly with them again. What happened to me we had that event on Friday. I flew out. I went to work on Thursday and left that afternoon and flew from San Diego to Dallas. And I knew I was going to get in at like 1 or 2 a.m. in D.C. And I got to Dallas, and our flight got delayed, and then it got delayed again, and then they canceled it. And this is Thursday night. And then we're in the plane for 2 hours before they canceled the flight. We're sitting in the plane. And then they're like, hey, sorry, guys, the flight's canceled. The next flight we can get you is Saturday afternoon. And I'm like, this is Thursday night. I'm like, what? That doesn't help me at all. Like, I'm literally missing the entire reason I'm going to DC and stuff. And it was just a big shit show. They didn't even have hotel vouchers for people. They'd run out of hotel vouchers because so many flights had been canceled and stuff. So I felt like my SoCal homeless brethren sleeping on the floor in the airport or trying to sleep curled up in a ball. Just miserable, man. So I was super bummed about the event, and I really wanted to go, and I'd like to talk to you about it and kind of your take on everything on like the Sunset Parade and all that stuff, because I've never been to Washington, D.C. I really wish I would. I've been up to Little Creek and stuff multiple times. I was that close, and I just never made that extra leap over to go check out D.C., and I really regret it. And that would have been like the perfect opportunity because there was so much stuff that I could have done that weekend. So let's talk about that weekend, with General Bellin and David Armstrong also, helped set that up and everything. So shout out to him and his podcast, a Moments in Leadership podcast. So what'd you guys end up doing, man? How was the parade and stuff?
So the parade was pretty cool. That was my first time, ever seeing the parade or ever seeing the silent drill platoon in action and all that. So that was definitely pretty cool to see. I'm not really much for, fanfare and ceremony and all that. But it was still cool to see, and I can greatly appreciate the amount of rehearsal and training that has to go into all of it, like between the band and the silent drill. Like there's a lot of rehearsals that has to happen so that they can pull that off, which I think is a big takeaway that a lot of people can look at, because like especially within the infantry, you get the guys, because those are all O3s that are part of the silent drill battalion or whatever it is that they're called. I'm messing that up, but they're all O3s. It's all like their first duty stations. They're a bunch of younger dudes. And then, when they finally show up to the fleet, we always all like would make fun of them, like, oh, your little rifle twirler, and they're a bit behind the power curve because they do conduct some sustainment training. But, after 2-3 years there, you're definitely not as proficient as your peers who have been in the infantry, in a Victor unit. But still, just like to pull off, what they do for all those parades and the travel. I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from that. But yeah, it was cool to see. It was a nice little ceremony. We were invited to the reception or whatever beforehand. So, we walk in a room and all kinds of folks are in there. Obviously, Lieutenant General Bellin, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, the Air Force Reserve Lieutenant General, I forget his actual title, like Chief of the Reserves or something like that. Some Army folks were in there too. But a lot of the reserve commanders, the different services were all invited. So a lot of different people in the room. Secretary of the Navy was there. So just, a lot of people. I did my thing and just kind of stood off to the side and watched because I don't really have much to say to a lot of those folks. But I mean, it was definitely interesting. The whole thing was kind of surreal too. You know, like I never imagined that starting a simple little Instagram page would lead to something like that. So it was a little entertaining.
Yeah, it definitely shows the power of social media, right? That like when David Armstrong reached out and was like, "Yeah, man, General Bellin loves the podcast." I'm like, "What? Really? Like that's super cool, you know?" Like, and sent the invite. I'm like, "Man, like you see the numbers." Like when you're in social media or you have a YouTube channel and stuff like that, you see the numbers, but they're just numbers. You don't know who's actually receiving that. You know, like very influential people could be seeing the stuff that you're creating and passing it on to other influential people or taking note of what's being said. And I think that kind of just shows the power of social media and how the internet and social media has like shrunken the world, you know, where you have now it's so easy to access. I found like when I'm looking for someone for the podcast, I've reached out to people that I'm like, this might not be feasible, but I'll hit them up anyway. Like, and they respond back, and it's like, wow, man, I can't believe this dude's actually talking to me on, you know, Instagram direct messages or something like that. So, the power of social media is definitely awesome. I was watching one of the videos from the event from I think the reception beforehand, and they had a Navajo code talker there. Correct?
Yeah. I forget his name. He was a corporal while he was in the Marine Corps when he got out. I forget his name though. He was the leader of the Navajo Nation for a while,
wow.
but I mean, he's getting on in years. So of course, I forget his name too. The actual leader, current leader of the Navajo Nation, was out there, and he was the guest of honor for the parade. Yeah, that was definitely cool to see. I kind of sat behind him at the ceremony. He was, you know, doing his best. He was in a wheelchair, but he was doing his best to stand up, you know, with like the national anthem and stuff like that wherever he could. So that was very cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that right there was probably one of my biggest like bummer moments, like seeing because I didn't know that they were gonna have any of those guys there. So when I saw that there was like a code talker there, I was like, damn, like what an opportunity that would have been to meet someone, you know, that like their impact on the war was huge. You know, their contribution of for people that don't know what we're talking about or don't know anything about the code talkers, they were brought in. The Navajo Native Americans were brought in to use their language as a code that the Japanese couldn't break. So they would, you know, say things instead of like tank, they would call it a turtle, but in the Navajo language. So it was like super confusing for the Japanese and stuff like that. And I think that's just like, I mean, they were involved in all those major battles, you know, like all the, and just throughout the Pacific. And I think their legacy is well established. So it would have been an awesome opportunity to meet somebody like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so you guys were also up there talking about like social media and the power of social media. And, you know, what's your take on this? Is a completely different military, right? Because they have to deal with people that have like big followings. You know, there's people that are just lance corporals that have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 followers on Instagram. And I think we've all seen, you know, the effects of someone going on social media and making accusations or, you know, venting whatever, and the power that has. And sometimes it's like something that probably should have been taken care of and whatever. And sometimes it's people overblowing their situation, their current thing. And, you know, that's got to be difficult for the leadership to deal with, right?
Yeah, I think that's like, I talked about that with a few of the guys that I was out there with. So I spent most of my time there hanging out with the communicator and First Sergeant Seamus Flynn. And we talked about it. It's like, you know, a lot of the pages have come out, you know, and pushing positivity and proficiency within your, you know, given realm, your MOS within the, you know, the military and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And also some Marines who focus like Marine Corps stuff. Whereas before it was you just like took pictures of yourself in your uniform and, you know, you flex your muscles, you do a little dance, you know, literally show your ass. And like, that's what fame is supposed to be, because that's what you see like on the civilian side of it. You know, like we do ridiculous things and it makes you popular. So now that it's changing, where it's like, no, let's be constructive and positive. It's, you know, what happens when the young cats see that and they think that's how I become popular, that's how I become important, right? It's still through social media, but now I need to like push whatever. And what does that turn into when you're young and you don't have years and years of experience to leverage for instruction, education, and information? You know, does that just turn into complaining? Does it, you know, kind of revert back to like the whole negative side of things? And there's definitely some young pages, you know, guys are corporals and sergeants, like you said, and there's probably some, I know there's a couple lance corporals that put good stuff out, you know, within the breadth of their knowledge and experience. So it'll be tricky, right? Because the last thing that we want is like now everybody has their phones out and everybody's just spending a whole field op like trying to take pictures and put it online to like make themselves some kind of like social media personality. Like it's still not the way to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't the way before. It's still not the way to be. Like everything I've done, I never expected it to go anywhere near this far. But I definitely, at the same time, like I also encourage it, you know, like definitely take pictures, you know, so you have the memories. Like if you scroll through my page, you're going to see a lot of recycled pictures because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I have so many. So it's good for you guys to take pictures so they have the memories and all that. But everyone has to kind of watch that balance. Like don't just be throwing everything on social media for the sake of it. You know, that really hasn't changed.
Yeah, there's a danger to that, you know, if it's unfettered like release of information, because then you could accidentally start releasing like sensitive information and stuff. And if your whole purpose of going to the field is to make sure you get some cool photos and then training a second, that's obviously, you know, not a good thing. So I remember, and you probably remember too, like the first like marine content creators I can think of are those dudes that were in 29 Palms, and they used to make those like Vine videos, or they used to make like the short YouTube videos, like the one guy did like the crocodile hunter kind of impression and stuff like that. And it just seems like it's kind of spread from there, you know?
Yeah, I've only been on social media now. Well, I mean, I had Facebook, but I was really over on it. I just used it to like keep in touch with people. So it's like, go on, contact this person because we're Facebook friends, but I don't have their cell number. And that was kind of the width and breadth of my Facebook experience. Now I've only been on Instagram for, I don't know, maybe 2 years now. So there's a lot of stuff that like has happened in the past and I'm just not, you know, familiar with.
Yeah. Do you manage do you do all your own management of your own accounts, like your own analytics, and you like do all that yourself?
Yeah, I don't really look at the analytics as much. When I first put it to like, I made it a professional page or whatever the Instagram, I think it's professional in that business. Made it a professional page, and so that gave me access to the analytics, and I would kind of look at it, but like, okay, you know, that is what it is. I really don't bother with it too much anymore. I mean, I probably should. I'm sure I could dig into it and then, you know, look at like, okay, how do I gain more engagement? And, you know, the follower count is just a thing that's going to happen or it's not.
Yeah.
I'm really too concerned with the follower count. The only reason I know, like, I understand it's important in a sense, because the more followers you have, the further reaching the information is going to be. But yeah, I mean, I do manage it. I've got my main page, you know, Blake Water 326, and I have my business page for Maneuver Training Solutions. And it's definitely a little tricky to manage, you know, 2 pages at once and trying to put out, you know, content for both.
Mm-hmm.
I only have a few things up on YouTube right now. I've kind of taken a hiatus until I can figure out my audio video setup a little bit better. Trying to do it all on my phone and then editing things on my phone and now it doesn't want to save back into the camera roll so I can post it. So I got to rework all that. So eventually I'll get YouTube up and running again. And, that is really just going to be like long form stuff of what I'm putting out on Instagram. The hardest thing has been with Instagram pushing the reels, which are maxed out at 60 seconds, trying to deliver a 60-second sermon, for lack of better terms, about something that, if I were to talk on it, I could talk for 10, 15, 60 minutes at a time. So it's like trying to cram a bunch of stuff into 60 seconds. And then I think it's 2,200 characters is the caption limitation, which includes every time space bar. So then like trying to, add stuff into there. It's just been a lot to like try and figure out how to manage that. But I'm pushing the reels because that's what Instagram is pushing out. So if I want the engagement, if I want the reach and people receiving the information, I got to do it through the reels.
Yeah, reels is definitely, well, first off, you sound like you're getting a pretty good handle. You sound like a social media pro over here, talking about the character limits and, the different things that you have to do to like improve your engagement and improve yourself within the algorithm so that, even if you have 52,000 followers, it's not going to show them all those people your content unless some people start engaging and stuff. So social media is an interesting game. I'm in marketing. That's what I do. So it's like I dig into the analytics, and a lot of times for like someone like you, your page is already doing great. You're already like you're putting up good content. I think it's, most people's problem when they try to start a page is they're like, all right, I'm going to start a meme page, or I'm going to do this kind of page. And then they just start it and just start going. And then they quickly run out of content or ideas for content. And it's something I've always told people that are looking at doing something like this. I'm like, man, I would probably go a couple months, if not up to 6 months of, depending on what you're doing, what kind of content you're creating, but like building up a good like reserve of content that you can consistently release stuff every week. Like for me, it's been an issue with the podcast. I've been going, this last 2 podcasts have been like every other week rather than every week. And it comes down to time, trying to find people that are right for the podcast, getting people on. And then, people have to cancel for some reason, one thing or another. I'm working a full-time job now. Like I actually started like a full-time job. So I have that on top of everything else I'm doing. And it's just, it's a weird game to play, right? It's like a weird balance. You got to find like good content, but you also have to have enough content to release it on a regular basis so that your followers have a reason to keep coming back.
Yeah. That's been like some of the issues I've dealt with is sometimes I'm sitting there like, oh, that's not important. Oh, that's boring. But then I like finally make a post about whatever I thought was boring or not important. People are like, oh my God, thank you for sharing that. And I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes I forget that, not everyone knows the things that I know. So I may think it's boring or not really important, but like other people, that could be exactly the information that they were looking for. So there have been like spats where I might only post like once a week, and then like I'll just get hit with a flood of like all the stuff I want to throw out there, and I'll get 1 or 2 posts out a day every single day of the week. The more that I'm on social media, it's like one of the reasons I like scrolling through is I do like sharing other people's content because there's a lot of good pages out there.
For sure.
So I like to share their content, and then that a lot of times will spark my own creativity. So that definitely helps.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's tricky here and there, and trying to avoid like getting into tactics, trying to keep it very like wave top on those issues and not getting too much in the nitty gritty. I work with Orion Training Group. I'm a member of the Instructor cadre there as well. So whenever Orion shares a post, it's like kind of go in and can I add some value in the comments section? I try and drop a comment into there. But yeah, that's about as far as I dig into like the actual tactics of things is, whatever Jared puts out with Orion and the comments I drop in. Otherwise, I just try to keep it to more, I guess, more benign in a sense as far as like information security and operational security type stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, it makes sense. You're putting out good content that a new user or someone new to the community or someone that or new to a piece of gear, it gets them a good start on understanding how to work with it in the best possible way, or look at it a different way than maybe they had already considered looking at it for employment. Yeah, and I think that's great. I appreciate the fact that you said like, hey, my audio video is not that great, so I'm waiting to add more content to the YouTube channel, because I think that's another thing a lot of people really mess up on is there's like easy fixes. Like, hey man, like, so when I first started this podcast, it was audio only, but in my mind I was always like, at some point I need to get on YouTube because I'm already recording the podcast. Why not just go ahead and slap a camera on both of us and make a video too? There's not too much difference there. But I waited until I had saved up enough money to get like a camera, like lights and stuff, because I wanted it to look like quality. And I think people appreciate that, that you take a little bit of extra effort to get just a better light, so it's not all dark looking. Or your microphone, you have a good microphone, so it's not all windy sounding if you're outside, or fucked up sounding.
Yeah.
It's those little things that definitely make a difference. So I think that's a good move on your part.
Yeah, I'll probably end up like reshooting the videos that are up there right now. And that's the other problem too with like doing that long form content. Is I'm like, okay, this is, for YouTube. Like I don't need to worry about being really, really brief. And the last video I shot was about gun belts, and it was 60 minutes of footage. And I'm like, no one's going to sit and watch a 60-minute video about gun belts. So I definitely have to still work on being more succinct and trying to keep things to like under 30. I would say like 15 to 30 minutes are the sweet spot for the stuff that I want to put out there. But yeah, I mean, it's all a learning curve, like you said, and I'll get better at it and keep putting the info out. I've had a lot of people hit me up like, oh, you should start a Patreon, and I would pay you for this. And I'm like, I'm giving it for free. Like, I don't want you to pay me for what should be free. If you want to pay me, then take a class with Orion or come take a class with Maneuver Training Solutions. If you really want to give me your money, do it that way so I can then render you some useful information and skills on a one-on-one basis. But, for things like how to store your chem lights or how to mount a magazine pouch, like I'm not going to put that behind a paywall.
Yeah. I think you're looking at it wrong. It's not behind a paywall, because you can just have a Patreon, have all your stuff for free, and people can just go on there and donate if they want to. Not to have, you can do either one. You can have exclusive content behind the paywall, or you can just have it out there and you promote it in your video and go, hey, just go check out my Patreon or whatever. And, people can pledge to donate $2 a month or whatever. It's something I've had people say to me. They're like, hey man, I've gone to your website. I'm not really in the market for a podcast t-shirt or a sticker. If you start a Patreon, let me know and I'll donate there, because, I like the content. And I haven't done it as well. But it is something I've considered. And honestly, I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, if I started a Patreon and I had enough people like donate to that, I would get rid of all the ads, like on my audio, because my audio podcast has ads at the beginning, middle, and end. And I would get rid of all those ads, because there's no need for it. There's no need to double dip, if that's something. So that's something I might do in the future. But I see what you're saying, though. You don't want to put you're trying to do something for the greater good. You're not necessarily trying to put something behind a paywall and, necessarily make money off of it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of like, I feel like, if I get money, like I actually earned that money.
Well, you don't think you've earned it? Like, let's talk about this, because how long does it take you? How long does it take you to record a video? One, come up with the idea, set everything up, record the video, edit the video, come up with the description that's 2,000 characters or whatever, come up with a headline, and then or a description, and post it. Like, that's time. Like, people, I think if anyone was like, oh, I can't believe you're trying to make money off this. Like, bro, I bet you, me guessing, if you make a 10-minute video on Instagram, I bet it takes you at least an hour and a half of prep work, recording, and editing. Am I right or wrong on that?
Yeah, definitely. definitely takes time, especially like making even just the 1 minute reels. It's usually like when I post something, that's at least like the third take, because I'll start talking and then I'll look up at the phone timer. I'm like, okay, that's like, I just recorded 2 minutes of me yakking. That's not going to work. So like, I'll watch it like, okay, what were the good points I put out? All right, let me try this again. And then I'll start again and I'll stumble over my words. I'm like, well, that doesn't work because now I'm going to take too long. So I start over again.
Yeah, I would definitely say don't discount yourself. You're definitely putting in work.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes some time, and that's been one of the balances too about this whole thing is finding the time without trying to take time away from my family. You know, when I was still active, fortunately, when I started this thing, I was still active duty. I was at the end of my career and in a position where I did have a good amount of time to myself. You know, it wasn't the whole 6 a.m. formation, and then you're there until like 1800 when the CO wants to come back out and release you for the day. Like, so it was easier for me to find the time here and there, you know, before like my family got home at the end of the day or whenever. But it's still a balance. You know, I got to make sure I'm not dedicating all of my time to social media and still giving my family time now that I'm retired. But it's also been easier to find it because, you know, I have my company and I work with Orion, but that's not like a Monday to Friday 9 to 5. That's okay. There's a class coming up. I'm going to go teach a class, you know, for 2-3 days, and then I'm home. I also started on working for another company that has a contract locally. We teach in a federal agency, and like when I'm in session with those guys, that's like 3 weeks, you know, out the door at 7 a.m. and I could be back home as early as like 2 p.m. or as late as like 6 p.m. And that's like 3 weeks of work. So in those periods, that's where it's trickier to find the time to put out content. The content kind of slows down. But then, you know, it's only 3 weeks at a time. And so in between those periods of 3 weeks, like I've got a good amount of spare time to come up with stuff. So yeah, I'm sure I'm looking at it kind of the wrong light, but that's, you know, been the story of my life is, you know, I give and I don't really like to take.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. You know, whatever you're doing is working. You know, you're growing consistently. Your page is growing. You know, it looks like you have some good. Everything looks good. I know what you're saying when you say that it's not work or whatever, because it doesn't feel like work. Because work feels like you're out sweating, you're out on the range, you're out moving around, you're out doing stuff or whatever it is. And this is like sitting on your couch, on your phone, like trying to make some edits or trying to upload something, and it just doesn't feel like work, but it is time and it takes time. That's been kind of a weird thing for me, like working a civilian job now is like, it just doesn't feel, it's hard to take stuff serious after being in the military. You know what I'm saying? Because everything else just doesn't feel as serious anymore. You're in a different world where you're still like plugged in and like actively like maintaining, you know, proficiency in different stuff that you had to do in the military. So it's a different world for you, but I'm in a completely civilian job with people. I think I might be the oldest person, even older than my boss, in my office. And it's just like a completely different kind of environment than like a regular day in the military. So have you had any issues with YouTube or Instagram kind of throttling your reach because it's the content, you know, because it's weapons and stuff like that?
So that was an issue for a little bit. I had a few people message me like, hey, you know, when I try like looking you up, like I'm not seeing you on my feed. I try looking you up, like I have to type in your entire name. I got to get all the way to like Blakewater 032 and like then you pop up. So I think there were periods where I was like shadow banned, and then recently I had 2 comments. One one was beginning of May, and then the last one was like end of May, or one was April, one was May. They were taken down by Instagram on other posts that I commented in other people's posts. Or no, one was on one of mine, one was on somebody else's post. They were taken down, and all of a sudden I found myself like getting logged out, like continuously logged out and having to log in. And that's the whole logging out thing has calmed down now. I have an issue with that for about a week and a half, but there was like a 2-week period where I just kept getting logged out of my page, and I tried to log back in and it would give me errors. So I don't know if that was related or if that was a separate glitch or if someone was trying to hack me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I had a little bit of a problem with that. I'm pretty sure that my business page is throttled because it is like my little company, my little LLC, is firearms training. It's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the content involves me, pretty much me with a gun, demonstrating techniques and videos and pictures of classes and talking about, what's taught at classes and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure that's pretty well throttled because, I'm only sitting at like 4,000 something followers on that page. It's been up now, I don't know, since late last year. And I don't know. Yeah, I'd find it a little bit interesting that that page is like generating such low engagement, being based all off firearms. Well, meanwhile, my main page is obviously doing pretty well with engagement.
I don't know if you have done this yet, but something that you could try is sharing your business page, like a post that you've put up, sharing it in the stories of your big page to drive people over to that. So you've been doing that already? Yeah,
I do that every post that I make with my business page. I share on the stories of my main page. And I've even gone so far as like, hey, like, I'm moving all like the firearms based content is going to go over on the business page. So the business page is still meant to be like informational and educational. Mm-hmm. Then like the bottom of the caption will be like a little blurb of, got a class coming up, websites, link is in the bio, hope to see you on the range. And like, that's that. But I don't know. It's just not driving a lot, but it is what it is. I'm not sweating it because it's just like a side thing. It'll grow as I, maintain and I keep holding classes in the local area. And mostly that the company exists, one, to work through Orion, and, Orion has big reach and doing stuff all over the country. And that's, all great stuff. And I enjoy that. As far as what I do with just my company locally, it's to support the guys, here on Camp Lejeune. And if anybody wants to come out from Bragg, I'm a couple hours from Fort Bragg, and just, provide them like something that I wanted. When I was young in the service and wanted an extra look and wanted new ideas and maybe better techniques than what I was being taught, that's all I'm trying to provide. And so it'll sustain itself. And fortunately, it doesn't really cost me anything. It's pretty low cost. So
that's a great thing. Is it's a lot of time. It takes up time, but the actual money cost is not there. And then once it's up, and that's it. It's done.
Like I work with a range facility, here locally. So like I can post as many classes as I want. It doesn't cost me anything. I don't have like a rental fee for the facility. It's just, there's a cost per student. So if I get one student, then, they get just that, fee, that range fee for that one person. If I get 10 students, then, it's a bigger payday for them. Mm-hmm. So it's really like, and that's was the whole idea behind it too, is so it doesn't cost me anything. If I, hold a class and no one signs up, I'm not out anything, and it's actually kind of nice sometimes when, the few times I've gotten no signups for a class, because then I just look at my wife, on a Friday, and I'll be like, hey, looks like you and me are hanging out on Saturday. So she's like, hooray. And, we get a day to ourselves. So that's always cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So your background, for people that may not have listened to the first time you came on, I think it was episode 103. They could check that out. I think what you're doing, the important thing about what you're doing is you're providing information. You're like that NCO that a lot of guys don't have, that you're providing, like, here's little tips and tricks on this. Here's how to do this a little bit better. And I think it's really interesting, and I'm sure you can appreciate it more than most, because for the people that have listened to 103, they'll know that you got to the fleet. Well, you went to boot camp before 9/11. 9/11 happened while you were in boot camp, and then you got to the fleet
Yep.
and started doing workups for like the 31st MEU and stuff like that. But specifically remember you mentioning that when you got there was only one sergeant in the company. So there was no like real institutional knowledge in the company that could be trickled down and taught to all the junior guys and stuff like that. And I think a page like yours kind of fills that gap. Would you agree?
Yeah, and that was really the whole thing behind it is, the last 4.5 years of my career, was spent as a professional military instructor, and I was teaching Marine reconnaissance companies. I was teaching infantry platoons, and occasionally here and there we would farm out and work with some of the infantry units. And I just saw there was like a gap in knowledge. A lot of things I would have considered basic knowledge when I started in the Marine Corps, and things I've now come to consider basic knowledge, that even not just the young guys, but even like their platoon sergeants just don't.
And it's no fault of their own, right? I mean, it's just if you haven't done it, you haven't done it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really blame people, right? You join the service, and we're going to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, so you're gearing up for deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan. So it's like, do I really need to know how to make a fire or procure water, or do I really need to have like super good concealment techniques because we're just doing convoys everywhere? So there's like a lot of fieldcraft stuff that kind of fell to the wayside because it just wasn't that important for those deployments. People stopped putting premiums, and then we could analyze the whole thing with how stuff trickled down from the top with the lack of strategy. And so we lost some stuff. I don't want to say we lost like a lot or a good amount, but we lost some stuff because we were very focused on that theater specific, and we kind of got caught sleeping about other things we should have been doing. So people just don't know what they don't know. Yeah. And so I just hop on social media and just start providing my own insight and advice, and kind of take it from there.
No, I think it's great because we, at the end of like big exercises, at the end of deployments, units do AARs, the after action reviews. They type up how it went. This is what we worked on. This is how, here's our overall successes. Here's things that we need to work on, along with some ideas of how we can make these things better. But it's always at like the company and battalion and higher levels. It's like big picture stuff. Like, hey, when we maneuver company A to here, we should go this, we should do it this way. And you're providing information down to that fire team, that individual and like fire team level, the little skills that you learn hanging around the barracks with some old salty dudes that tell you like, hey, when you tie your boots, do it this way. Hey, when you put your pack on, try it like this, because it does, it carries better over an 18-mile hike or whatever. That's the kind of, it's almost like for the individual, that information is so much more important than the watered down AARs that the unit does at the end of like exercises and deployments. I just think it's great, man. I think your page does a good job of it. Goons Up, they're another one that was shadow banned. Also, you got to type in like their entire name to get to. They do a great one. I've been looking at the communicators page, and he's got a lot of. Comm is one of those weird things. You almost have to be half wizard to get some of it, to the little tricks and stuff. And what's interesting about like a comm page is, or comm in general, communications in general, is that the whole world is moving into a more digital space, and that those comm MOSs, the network guys and stuff like that, and the cyber warfare guys, those jobs are only going to become more important, and their understanding of the like communications, like structure and stuff like that is going to be immensely important, because all these other countries are also, gaining better technologies and stuff. And they're going to be able to fight back with a couple keystrokes on a computer rather than having to shoot, tons of artillery at something. We're moving into a different world. It's kind of a interesting thing to see. And again, where your page I think is important we see how the Marine Corps is kind of shifting tactics to kind of make more small team, that small team leadership decision making is going to be more important because they're going to be working in more small teams, disaggregated from each other. Hey, here's your mission, go take care of it, and you're going to have to be self-sufficient and stuff. And I think again, on that lower level, the information you're putting out there is going to be clutch for a lot of those guys, especially because we haven't really worked in Pacific Islands or anything like that. So I think any kind of knowledge that can make your understanding of your gear, your training, your weapon, anything like that better is just, I don't know. I think it's all important,
Yeah. And I think a big thing with it too is, with the young service members is you don't have a whole lot of like absolute control over a lot of things in your life. When you join the military, a lot of decisions start being made for you.
Mm-hmm.
But like your individual equipment, that's one of those things that you have a good amount of control over. And that's why, like, when Tumar Div put out like the division-wide gear SOP that like came down from the division headquarters, the reason that there was like such a bad move and it kind of blew up in their faces. You have all these lance corporals and PFCs and corporals and everybody else is like, what the hell? Like, you took away a measure of my control.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have so much less freedom now because you took that away from me. And I think that was something that's really important for people to understand. And one of the reasons I think that my page is so popular is because I focus on, gear, and everybody loves gear. There's all the folks that just love the gear, period. But because I'm focusing on all those little things that like you can control. You can control your individual skills. You can control your fitness. You can control your equipment. How well it's put together. Are your knives sharpened? All that little stuff. Like, you have control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And to exert that control, it makes you feel like you are more in charge, of your life, and you start realizing you do have a lot. You are still in charge and a lot to say. And I think that's why it's important to put that stuff out there and why it's so well received.
Mm-hmm. Not only are you like in charge of your own life and stuff like that when you're messing with your own gear, but you're the person wearing it all day, every day. You know how you need to place your stuff, and it can't just be, hey, Sergeant Major said everybody's got to put their IFAC on the left side and their magazine's got to go right here, and that, it can't always be like that. It's not everybody. I mean, I'm left-handed, so that automatically changes stuff up for me compared to a lot of people where they place all their stuff. It's I agree with you. I didn't know they did that, but that definitely seems like a bad idea. Like, what does the division need to be telling the individual like how to carry his individual gear? I mean, I could get it where you're like, hey, battalions have to have these capabilities. This kind of gear has to make it out to the field, and then it's up to the battalions and the companies to decide how that happens, and then on the individuals to decide the final, like, here we go, here's how we're going to carry it. But yeah, I just don't. That seems like a horrible idea. When did that come out?
Yeah. 2018 maybe.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that happened. And there was more to it, and that's one of those things. And that was kind of like we get into, circling back around to the meeting in DC was, the general had an emotional reaction, and he generated his white letter, and he just pushed it out. He didn't have like any of his aides or anybody proofread it or look at it or be like, hey, he got emotional and he put it out there. But at the same time, my wife was working at division, and she was in a lot of those division sync meetings, or, whatever their term for it, to Cub. And the general was telling the battalion commanders, like, get your houses in order. Like, they're walking into the chow hall, and there's, dudes in their pajamas, like straight up pajamas in the chow hall, which is like, that's just obviously it's against regulation, and that just kind of makes you like a white trash lazy person to be going out, in your friggin' pajamas. A lot of things were like he'd walk past Marines in front of the PX, and they would just like glance up from their phones at him and continue to sit on their ass. It's like, hey, there's customs and courtesies, man. Like, stop scrolling through social media for a second, salute the general, render the greeting of the day, and then everybody moves on with their lives. So there was a lot behind it, and that also goes into like what we talked about when in DC, with the force design and social media messaging, is like there's this force design, like it's not being delivered well. You guys are making decisions, and not only making decisions, but now you're acting decisions like, we're going to get rid of tanks, and you got rid of tanks, and no one really explained to the force, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of us could look at it objectively, be like, okay, well, I think, this is why it made sense. And there was a little bit of messaging that came out about decisions like that. But then they also got rid of law enforcement battalions. So for the the Marine Expeditionary Unit, they lost their detachment, which also impacted the Maritime Raid Force, because now they lost their people who are all specifically trained in site exploitation. They're trained in how to use the equipment to gather biometrics, like evidence collection. That's their realm, and we lost that. And just like no one really explained why that had to go away. So that was the things we talked about, kind of circling back to the topic of the meeting in DC, like your messaging on things. And the General Bellin like admitted, he's like, we did not explain, a lot of this stuff correctly. And then when they do try to explain it, they explain it like they're talking to their peers. They're talking to their other generals and colonels and battalion commander level type people. But you also need to be communicating with the NCOs and, the E3 and below, and, the staff sergeants and the gunnies. Like, you need to be communicating with them as well, so they understand, like, what all this means. Why are we making these certain moves? What are the implications of it? But there's kind of a lack of that. So, lessons learned, hopefully.
Yeah, it's tough, man.
We talked.
I when they first talked about the tanks being removed, I was like, what? Like, why? Like, I get, like, don't take them on the MEU. I can get that because it takes up so much room on the ship and stuff. But, like, to get rid of them completely, I was kind of like, I don't know about that. That seems kind of... I'm also of the mindset, too, where I'm out, and I'm like, I'm not seeing the full picture. I know I'm seeing 60% of whatever is going on. There's other stuff going on base, behind the closed doors, and stuff that I don't see. So they're planning for stuff based off of some kind of information, right? So I try to give them the benefit of the doubt that, like, okay, they're making these decisions because of one reason or another. I would say that reasoning, getting rid of the tanks, kind of became validated with this whole war in Ukraine when we've seen all this Russian armor just get shellacked. One javelin or whatever I can't remember the British one. Either one of those, single missile is just taking these.
They're using a little bit.
What's that?
Yeah, they're using a little bit of everybody's. As far as light armor goes, and then you have like between what you're seeing in the Ukraine and what happened in the I'm going to say this wrong, the Nagorno-Karabakh region, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Oh yeah.
Where everyone was like, oh, there's drones, and drones are making armor obsolete. Like, no, they're not making armor obsolete. Right? It's just that you have to consider things, like not owning the skies is not a new thing. Like, it's newer for us. It's something that we suddenly have to be introduced to again, but it's not something new. Armor still has its uses. It's still valid, but it's not useful to a Marine Corps, because a Marine Corps is littoral naval infantry, right? We operate from ship to shore. We aren't designed to be a second land army. And I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten. Again, it's one of those things where we kind of lost with all that time in Iraq and Afghanistan, because we were essentially acting as a second land army. That's not what our job is. And, you said it, like, tanks take up a lot of space on the ships. But more importantly than that, you have one method of getting that tank from the ship to the shore, and that's an LCAC. Your landing craft, and that LCAT can only take one tank at a time. So it's gotta, you gotta secure the beachhead enough for the tank, and then you gotta bring the tank in one at a time, and you need at least two of them really, so they can start being effective. Because obviously we deploy everything in a minimum of pairs, whether it's people or machine guns or tanks, and you end up losing a lot where we could focus on having a lighter, more agile force, and we employ different types of ground vehicles. We employ our light and medium anti-armor weapons, and we understand the fact that we're not going to be the ones to win the war. We're not going to be the ones to penetrate from the beach to the enemy's capital and overthrow the enemy regime. Like, that's just not our purpose as a Marine Corps. Did we do that in Iraq? Yeah, we did. Like, and it worked, right? We adapted, and we, quickly made that advance. But the other thing people forget too is, like, every war is a joint operation. Mm-hmm. The Marine Corps does not fight wars by itself. Even go back to the Pacific campaign. The Pacific was primarily the Marine Corps' and really the Navy's responsibility, but there was obviously the Navy there, and you had the Army there. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't fight wars on our own. And then on the other side of the world, in the campaign in Europe, obviously not a lot of Marines, but there were Marines present in very small numbers. Both before the invasion of Normandy, there was a very small handful of Marines involved in the actual invasion of Normandy, and further on into the European campaign. Nothing like battalion size, or literally like small, like 2-3 guys here and there, most liaisons. But no one fights wars alone. Like, we're a country, we fight as a country, which includes all of our armed services. Mm-hmm. I think this is where a lot of people are losing perspective on the force design. Is like, we think that we should be our own self-sufficient, force that can win a war, and that's not what we're ever going to be, and that's why even in our hymn it says we fight our country's battles. Right? We fight battles, we win the battles, and that facilitates the winning of the conflict overall.
Yeah, there's a 20 plus years of Afghanistan and Iraq definitely skewed perspectives. Especially, like, the Marine Corps kind of acted, like you said, as like a second land army, because we took on Helmand Province, and the senior leadership at the time jockeyed for that. And they're like, we want this to be a Marine Corps specific area, because they didn't want to be left out of the fight. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, what if it was just the Army with the occasional battalion every once in a while deploying? I just don't think that would have been very realistic, and it would have been too much pressure on the Army as a whole to fill in those slots if we weren't there. Yeah, you're right, man. We're supposed to be like the first, like, quick hit, or we're supposed to be the guys there, delaying the enemy or messing, just kind of fucking with their heads, I guess, or taking an area very quickly and then letting the Army come in and hold the area. It's never was supposed to be us come in, take over an area, and then we maintain it and run it and everything like that. I mean, you got your first couple years in the Marines, you got a glimpse of that because you were in the invasion and you saw how, that kind of thing is supposed to go down. Were you surprised after that? I mean, you were pretty junior still, I think, when the invasion happened, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Were you surprised as the war kind of drug on in Iraq that we were, like, no longer like an invasion force? We were like, they had Marines there maintaining different parts of the country?
I mean, I don't think it really surprised me because I hadn't been in long enough to know anything else. I hadn't been in any other conflicts. Really, the things that surprised me about Iraq was how we wouldn't, like, hold ground. And I get it's, counterinsurgency, but you set up the FOBs, and it was like you go out, you do something, and you go back to the FOB. So you would conduct an action, and then you would just give up all of that terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just physical terrain, it's the human terrain as well. And the human terrain is really, really important when you're fighting a counterinsurgency.
For sure.
And we give it all up, go back to the fob, and you refit, and there's all kinds of ammo and chow and water and everything you need is at the fob. And then the next day you go back out again, and a lot of that stemmed from the fact that there was like no clear strategy from the top of like, what are we doing? But that in itself was very frustrating to watch. Like, even to the point where my guys, they only understood offensive operations as raids. Like, they called every offensive operation a raid. And I'm like, guys, a raid is a specific action, right? It's a planned attack with a planned withdrawal. At its core, that's what a raid is. That's not the same as I'm going to clear and hold that piece of terrain. That's a different story. But a lot of them just couldn't really understand it because everything that they know. I mean, one is Recon Marines, right? We don't really do that. We conduct raids. But then what you see on TV and the news, you go on deployment, is everyone's doing raids. They're attacking, they're going in and doing whatever action, even if it's not like an attack. It could be, humanitarian, passing out blankets and soccer balls, and then you leave. You don't hold the terrain. So it's like, there's no way we're ever going to actually win this thing if we're not holding the terrain. So, I mean, it is what it is. At this point, it's what's happened has happened. And hopefully, we don't end up back in that region in, 10, 20 years doing it all over again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we got to learn our lesson at some point. Just like let them fight it out, let them do their thing. I don't know. It's all crazy and stuff. David Armstrong, I did talk to him. He did want me to ask you about. He said to ask you how the cigar club or cigar room was.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. I forget the name of it, but it was on top of an Italian restaurant. I guess Dave's a club member there, so he invited. I went, and the communicator showed up. So it was just myself, the communicator, and Dave Armstrong. And that was just the coolest little place. Sitting there and smoking cigars and drinking scotch. Food was amazing. And then, Dave graciously foot the bill. So
Dave's good people.
Couldn't really ask. Yeah. Yeah, that was a really great night.
Are you a cigar guy?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I don't do it very often. But if I'm going to smoke, I prefer cigars for sure.
Yeah. I used to on deployments I would bring cigars with me or order some while I was like overseas or whatever, and I don't know, being on ship kind of killed that for me because I would smoke on ship with one of the majors and someone else, one of the warrant officers and stuff, and so we're down in their smoking area and I'm a lowly E6 and below, and one time I was down there and this Marine gunny came over and he's like, "Hey man, you're going to have to go." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Those chiefs over there are pissed that you're down here. So if you don't go, they're going to like make a big deal about it." And I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And like, I'm like, this is fucking crazy. And that was like one of the last times I smoked a cigar on ship because I would go over to the E6 and below smoking area, which is right next to this massive intake fucking thing for the engine. So you basically have to wear earplugs while you're standing there. And it's just not cool at all. And like when you're smoking a cigar, it's supposed to be like a relaxing kind of thing.
Surrounded by a bunch of people who are just sucking down cigarettes, and it smells awful.
Yeah, it was bullshit.
I've been near the smoking pits on ship, and like you just get there, and it's like, ooh, no thanks.
Yeah, that was just another kick in the balls. I'm like, man, fuck this, fuck the ships, fuck the Navy. I was always so pissed about it. It was just always something to remind you, like, hey, you fucking hate being here, and this is why,
Yeah, it's the Navy is an interesting beast for like I do not agree with the way that, they treat their people. It's like, if you're not an officer or a chief, you're like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, look at the. I mean, you're seeing suicides on ships. You're seeing morale is just horrible. Like it. I mean, a couple of years ago, there were ships hitting each other multiple times a year and stuff like that. Like, it was just like, what the fuck is going on with the Navy? Like, what is going on over here? This doesn't look like the Navy that I thought of prior to joining the military and seeing like old school war movies, like Midway and stuff like that, where the ships are fighting and they're like, I don't know. It was just very disappointing. I won't get into it too much because I always get pissed off when I talk about it, but it was a bummer, definitely, to kind of see that and experience that being on ship. But
and I used to bring chew on deployments. And I carry that in my gear, and I just put a little pinch in whenever I was on watch. It would help me stay awake.
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you got to have. So on ship is when I really started getting into like drinking like. Well, I wouldn't say it was on ship, but it helped enhance it. Drinking good coffee because the mess decks always had shit ass coffee. This is another thing that's so stupid. And on the E6 and below mess decks, they would have Maxwell House coffee, which whatever, I don't care. That's not a big deal to me. But on the chiefs and officer side, it was always big bags of Starbucks coffee. And every once in a while, we'd try to steal like a bag of Starbucks coffee to get down in our mess decks and stuff. And it's like, this is the fact that there's like even different coffees depending on which mess deck you're in is just mind blowing, right? And I got tired of drinking shitty coffee and stuff, so I ended up buying a hand grinder, a French press, and a 10-pound bag of coffee beans off of Amazon. And I would just go up to the SAC, the Supporting Arms Coordination Center, where our office was at, and just go up there and hand grind some beans. I actually did it. I used the hand grinder this morning. I'm drinking French press coffee right now, and I still have the same hand grinder that I used. But yeah, little stuff like that definitely makes being on ship a little. Maybe you'll have to do some videos like that, like how to improve your living standards on ship.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's definitely not easy. And it can be a real drag on morale. I mean, fortunately, all of my time on ship was with Recon. But I remember being on the 31st MU, and we're in our squad bay, and we're in the command element squad bay. So we have our section on one side, but like you're just watching the rest of the command element, and they're just getting like harangued by their sergeants and their staff NCOs, and then their staff NCOs would come into our area and they'd be like, "You need a field day." We're like, "Dude, we did that hours ago. Like, we woke up on Thursday morning, we field day. Like, we're done." We'd walk through. It was weapons company was always right next to us, and we'd walk through their berthings, and they'd be sleeping on the floor. Like, why are you sleeping on the floor? Of all places, like, well, we're not allowed to be in our racks, but you're allowed to sleep. Like, your unit isn't going to engage you with any kind of tasks or anything, so you're all just going to sleep, but you can't sleep in your bed, so you have to sleep on the dirty ass floor that where like people walk in and out of the head, and they track that onto the floor of the berthing, and you're sleeping in it because you can't be in your bed. Like, lots of like silly rules that people make up on ship.
Yeah, those are those stupid rules that just make you miserable for no reason. Make you miserable just to make you miserable.
It destroys morale a lot of times, so it's definitely not easy. But that's one of the nice things about the 31st MU, at least, is you're generally only at sea for like a week or two, and then you're on land, and you're at least doing stuff. Even if like you're living out of a 2-man tent, you're at least doing stuff and you're engaged.
Oh yeah.
While you land, you get some libo before you get back in the boat, and then it's another week or two to get back to Okinawa, and then you're on Oki for 2, 3, 4 weeks again before you get back on the boat and do it. So it's a weird back and forth with the 31st MU. The 15th MU, we were at sea for, I think the longest period was probably like 3 weeks, something like that. I forget. It was still a long time ago, but for me, it wasn't too bad because we had our own berthing as the Force Recon platoon. We were right underneath. So it was like just eat, sleep, lift, do a class a day, do a shoot once or twice a week. So we had a pretty good life. So I didn't really have too much to complain about on ship. And that MEU actually had 24-hour chow, which is pretty clutch.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, they kept the fast food line open 24/7.
Fast food line? What are you even talking about right now? We never had anything like that.
They just do like we called it the fast food line because like you go there and you get like burgers and tots and fries and hot dogs, like that kind of real basic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it would just be like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, based on the supplies that they had. And then the other line was like your main fare. You get like, I don't know, fish and vegetables and mashed potatoes and all that kind of stuff. So you get like more of a real meal. But they kept the salad bar open 24/7, like, so you could go down at any time and get something to eat. Even if it wasn't like the best meal ever, it was something.
Yeah.
Which kept the way down, which was really nice.
Yeah.
Do that, and like the chow line like goes all the way forward and starts wrapping back towards the mess deck.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, that's how ours was too. Yeah, we didn't have 24-hour chow. They did have mid-rats for people that worked the night shifts, but the mid-rats were the worst meals. Like, let's say they had chicken nuggets for dinner. Probably half of them are either burnt or frozen, when you get them. It's like so fucked up. I was like, man, this is crazy. This is crazy that this is how our guys are being fed, The one good thing that they did have a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, were like apples on the salad bar, so you could walk by and, when they had them, I would probably eat at least 2 apples a day just because it was like something to fill me up a little bit between the shitty meals that we got and stuff. So I'm of the opinion that the MEU force needs to be scaled way back, and maybe like one company on ship rather than the entire battalion, one company on ship that is there to float around, do exercises with other nations, be a 911 force, in readiness, whatever. And then the other companies are land-based, either 29 Palms, they're training, they're keeping their skills up, they're doing that kind of stuff, or they're flying forward to maybe some of these exercises, or they're staying like staged in Kuwait, somewhere where they're not just rotting away on ship. Because a lot of, especially guys like you, when you had like, well, I guess you can't really take recon off ship. That's their whole purpose of being there. But a lot of these skills have to be worked constantly, or you get real rusty on ship, And
I think we didn't really dig too much into it and too much into the whole, expeditionary advanced-based operations that are part of the Force Design 2030. But my takeaway from it, at least, is that's kind of the idea, is like start forward deploying these forces and put them into contested spaces on land, not just floating around in the ARG and, disaggregating the ARG. Mm-hmm. So you got like ARG over here and half the ARG over here. It's like, we're going to put forces on the ground within contested space to provide that presence. And, deterrent is changing, right? It's no longer just like we have more nukes than you. So it's changing, and that's part of it. And a lot of people only look at it as the Pacific, but it's not just the Pacific. It's Northern Europe. There's a lot of places where like that EABO concept is going to apply. So I think we will see more of that. I know that part of the whole force design is like we need a bunch more amphib ships, and so we're trying to get the Navy to build those, but the Navy also got charged with a bunch of other stuff. So there's some definite conflicts to the force design being fully realized. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of good stuff that's still coming out of it. I don't really know why so many people are opposed to it, or the idea that like we're losing who we are as a Marine Corps. I think that's completely false. Mm-hmm. But people have their opinions, and unfortunately you get a lot of, well, I don't want to call them important people, but a lot of high-ranking or formerly high-ranking individuals who are out there kind of trying to put it on blast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'm kind of surprised that they're looking for more amphibious ships, because to me, again, something we've seen in Ukraine. How many we've taken out, or we haven't, but the Ukrainians have taken out like 2 Russian ships now, haven't they? Or multiple ships. That seems like another pretty big vulnerability if you have a bunch of people stuffed onto these, you know?
The ships they took out were also like really, really close to land, and they were taken out with, land-based systems. The whole idea with us is not to really be putting those ships in that region where they're vulnerable to infantry, ground-based fires. With organic weapons. Obviously, with like China, they've got all their missiles and rockets, and that's a concern, and that's part of like being in that contested space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think ships are too vulnerable as long as, like anything else, if you employ it correctly, it's not a huge vulnerability. And then where a lot of people look at this stuff, like going back to the armor conversation too, it's like, oh, it's obsolete. It's like, well, you want to call a tank obsolete because of drones or, anything. It's like, well, then people are obsolete because of bullets.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how do we fight? How do we fight then? If everything's obsolete because something can destroy it, then how do you even fight?
Yeah, it's a chess game. It's like, hey, we've got this capability. Now they've countered it with this capability. So now how are we going to counter that? And I don't think ships or tanks or anything are obsolete, but I do think that we have to really look at, is the juice worth the squeeze on some of the decisions? You know what I'm saying? Like, should we spend money on tons of gigantic LHDs and shit like that? Or should we do something a little bit less costly where we can get more of like smaller craft or, whatever. I'm on the outside looking in. So I'm making.
Well, I mean, we are trying to get the smaller craft.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parts of it. And, there's a lot of parts that like aren't really being made, very public, which
makes sense.
Is what we talked over there. We did have the people who run the flagship, Marine Corps page, the @Marines, the official, Marine Corps page were there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked to them too. Like, obviously General only had so much time. And we spent a lot of time on like introductions around the room, but when he had to walk out, like none of the rest of us had anywhere to go. So we talked with the people who run that page and, social media in general for the Marine Corps, and like, you got to do better in delivering your messages. And I think we struck a couple of nerves because it was right after they had put out the Pride Month post with the bullets. We're like, look, we get it, but that doesn't cater to anybody actually in the Marine Corps. Right, that's pandering to people outside the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Marines don't care about that. Like, we just want to be Marines. But when you start trying to highlight, whether it's based on their race, ethnicity, their gender, their sexual orientation, or what they do in the Marines, like if you were to make all of your social media messaging about like a specific MOS, then you're going to start isolating all the other MOSs. You just have to you got to just make it about being Marines. And if you want to talk about the diversity or highlight the diversity, then include like a picture of a platoon or a whole section, because there's going to be that diversity in there, So we talked into that, but just in general, like, you got to start messaging about the force design. Like, you can't just keep putting out, pictures of boot camp or like some random operation and have like some basic little blurble in the caption. You have to put out information that the Marines will absorb. Like, stop targeting the civilian populace.
Mm-hmm.
Target the Marines and inform the Marines of what's going on within the Marine Corps, because that's what you should be doing. But
yeah, it's I think it's one of those things where it's probably a difficult position for their social media person, because not only are they trying to do messaging for the military, one, you have to control the message. Like if you're not putting information out there, or you're not controlling the message about your organization, then you're leaving it up to everybody else to control the message. And like we said before, there's a lot of people in the military with a lot of followers, and if they're putting out whatever they want to put out unimpeded, then the Marine Corps is no longer controlling the message, and now these people are, and that's obviously not a good situation they want to find themselves in. Your point about the Pride Month post, yeah, that caught a lot of flack, and I think anyone that's having like an honest conversation, or having like you want to, we're looking at this seriously. The problem is, the whole point of going into boot camp and coming out of that experience is that you were broken down to a basic level. And all these little innate bullshit things like your race, your sex, your whatever shouldn't matter. None of that matters. It's all supposed to be one big team fight for the organization. And your individual characteristics don't fucking matter. We don't care that you have brown hair. Nobody cares that I'm left-handed. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just as innate of a characteristic as someone being black or white. I didn't choose to be left-handed. It just happened to me, right? It's and to say and the whole point is that when you start, and like the pushback that you're giving, when you start pointing out those individual characteristics and we make those like the highlight of one thing or another, you're doing exactly what you said. Is now you're leaving people back that are like, what the fuck? Well, why are we talking about this? Like, I thought we don't care about the individual. You know, we're not supposed to be caring about the individual. We're supposed to be caring about the organization. And also, you know, and you also got to look at, they're probably being told by the Department of Defense and their civilian leadership within that they have to make these posts. You know what I'm saying? That it's something that has to be done.
You got to toe the line, because at the same time, you don't want to seem like you're bigoted against anyone. You know, so occasionally you're going to have to do some messaging. This is like, hey, like we don't care, like we really don't care. So yeah, you can be openly gay, or, you know, you could, whatever it is, like, but then at the same time, when you also wait for like Pride Month to talk about it, or, you know, Women's Appreciation Month, or, you know, Black History Month, that's the only time you highlight it, like you're clearly just pandering and virtue signaling. You know, if you want to like put out this clear message that we value the team, we value being a family unit, but we understand that people are individuals, and you got to put this stuff out constantly throughout the year, instead of just waiting for, you know, the opportune window to do it. And then you have to do it in a fashion where, again, like, we appreciate everybody that we have in the force, but we're here to be Marines. Like, what you do in your time is what you do in your time, and who you are. Like, hey, cool, everybody brings something to the table, but we're all Marines.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you got to find a way to get that message through, and they do. They absolutely like have their hands tied, and one of them was he was a captain. I forget what he said. He was active or reserve, but I mean, he's only there. It's a duty station.
Yeah.
He's like, you know, you got me right now, and he's like, in 2 years when I leave, you know, it's gonna be somebody else, and so that person's, you know, individual opinion is going to start taking a play, and you know what the messaging looks like on top of, you know, whatever the command says. And there are the other person was a civilian, and you know, she was getting a little bit frustrated with us, and I think we kind of cornered them, so I don't really blame her for getting frustrated. They were trying to walk out, and all of a sudden, like, we just surrounded them. She was getting a little frustrated. And I can understand that, because she's like, look, you know, our hands are kind of tied, and, you know, our messaging is based off of like what we're seeing from the lower levels, because what they can't do, even though they run the flagship, like, hey, we are the @Marines page, they don't get to influence like the division pages, like 2 Mardiv and 3 Mardiv. Like, they don't really get to influence. Like, they can send suggestions through communication strategies, but, you know, if the map for the division CGs, like, nah, you know, that's not really what the messaging I want to put out right now, then they just crumple up and throw away the headquarters suggestion, and they drive on with the messaging that they want to put out. That's, you know, they feel is more pertinent to their division or MEF. So it's an interesting relationship they have um, between all the levels of the Marine Corps as in terms of the social media pages. But I mean, hopefully they got something out of what we told them.
Yeah, the Comstrat world is a difficult one, I think. Because they gotta get the messaging right. They gotta, it's, I don't know. It's just a strange world. And the whole, what really, here's a funny story about diversity in the Marine Corps. My air officer, when I checked into First Anglico, who's a Harrier pilot, he has a Hispanic last name, but he looks like a white dude, right? And he was saying when he finished like TBS or flight, maybe it was after flight school, something like it was early on in his career, but he was a pilot contract guy. The Comstrat guys, the communication strategy guys, contacted him and they're like, "Hey, we're doing a series on diversity in the military. We're trying to get increase recruiting numbers within the Hispanic and African American communities to these officer jobs, to be a pilot. We want you to come down and we're going to do a photo shoot and all this stuff." And he's like, like most people, like, I don't want to fucking do that. But it's like one of those things when it comes down, command's like, "No, bro, go." And he got there and they were like, "Oh, you're not, Martinez enough." And he ended up not even going to do the photo shoot or anything like that because he didn't look the part of the Hispanic person that they wanted to display. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, that's so crazy. Like, that, how is that not insulting? You know what I'm saying? Like, how are you going to look at a guy and be like, "Oh, well, are you fully, you're not Hispanic enough for what we're trying to get at." And it's like, that's so fucked up,
Yeah. I mean, that's my son. My son is half Colombian, but he's blonde hair, light skinned. So everyone's like, you're not Latino. And he's like, "Yeah, I am."
Man, such a crazy thing.
It is funny how like that whole, how like all that works, and people like trying not to be seen like bigoted or racist, end up being bigoted or racist, even if it's just a moment. It is amusing sometimes.
It's just ridiculous. And this was in 2000. He told me about this in 2015, which means it probably happened to him around 2010 or something like that. That's probably maybe even earlier than that. So this is something that's been kind of going on for a while. They've been trying to increase the amount of minorities in like leadership positions for a long time, but they're just not getting I don't think they're getting the results that they want. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about, so between the company that you started and Orion and stuff like that, what kind of training, who are you guys working with? Are you guys working with like law enforcement professionals? Are you working with like military guys? Like, what kind of training are you guys getting into?
So the majority of what we do with Orion Training Group, and so I've extended the same concept through my company. It's open enrollment. So we have venues. Orion is primarily based out of Louisiana, so most of the guys are down there, and Eastern Texas. So we have a lot of venues down there. We're developing venues on the East Coast, but you get a venue. What kind of training can that venue support? Okay, we can do firearms here, so let's hold a pistol course or a carbine course or a combination therein, or let's do CQB, and we just we work out the logistics with the venue, and we just post the course dates, and that gets posted on Instagram. You go on the website, you fill out copy and paste this little kind of registration form, you email it to Jared, who's the CEO. That way he can kind of get a feel, and he's had to turn some people away. People just are not fit to conduct the training. There have been some people who have like clear mental issues, and it's like, no, we're not comfortable around you and loaded firearms. But for the most part, you sign up through this form, and then he sends you an invoice, and you pay for the course. So the places I've been so far with Orion, it's usually a pretty even 50-50 split of law enforcement and civilian. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll get 3 and 4 guys from a department SWAT team. Sometimes it's just a handful of people from all around. A lot of times, because agencies will actually host the training at one of their facilities, so it's like, hey, you can use our shoot house or, our access to this facility that we have, but, give us some free seats. So we'll have, a few people from that department. And then there's usually like one or two, maybe three, just military folk, some have been special operations, some have been, conventional, where they just paid their own way to the course to gain some extra information and insight into, whatever it is, based on the class that's being taught. So yeah, well, short answers is it's open enrollment. Anyone can join. We are starting to pick up agency contracts, so specific departments are asking us to come back and do, training with them annually. That's starting to pick up. My stuff locally is entirely open enrollment. I've got the website. You go on there, you look at the class schedule. Okay, cool. That class works for you. You just click on it, add it to your cart, pay for your cart, and you're enrolled in the class. Simple enough.
When you guys are working with specific agencies, do they give you like, hey, here's our standards. We'd like you to kind of clean up our standards a little bit or show us a different way to do this? Like, what do you kind of see when you have an agency come in and like their guys show up?
It's more along the lines of like, we like what you guys, usually it's because they've already sent some guys to one of our classes or their guys paid their own way and came back with the information.
Mm-hmm.
So now they want to see more for themselves, like what it is that we offer and how can we benefit their department. We have had some departments have reached out to some of our guys. Most of the Orion guys are law enforcement veterans. So I'm one of the few on staff that does not have a law enforcement background. But they'll reach out to these guys and like, hey, like just a basic consultation of this is our current policies, how can we improve? And so there's no tactics or firearm, training involved. It's just a consultation talking through, some procedures and stuff like that. So that's most of what we do when it comes to like the agency contracts is the consultation piece. And then we call it the flexible search program. So it's not a defined doctrine of this is how you clear a structure. It's, these are the ways that you can work a door, whether you're pieing or you're rolling across or you're doing your step-centered, more dynamic entries. The various ways you can reach points of domination within a room. There's a couple different ways you can skin the cat when it comes to hallway procedures. So we show them different things, and we always get the messaging back. So we get those law enforcement guys, they come through and they go back to the departments and they'll message like, hey, we incorporated, A, B, and X from your program into our SOPs and our tactics set. And that's what the goal is. It's not about making people do CQB our way. It's just about, here are the different techniques. Here's why they are effective. And here's why they're effective in a given situation. And why, you might want to use a pie on one door and you're going to have to go dynamic on another one. So here's like the best way you can go dynamic on it. Because sometimes you're in a school, sometimes you're in a double wide trailer or a single wide, so it's like, you can't apply the exact same technique to every situation. But if you understand principle and you have some other tools in your toolbox, then you can flex and get yourself through, the objective. So yeah, it's most of what it comes down to with them. We're working on some other stuff, with agencies and trying to kind of expand our repertoire and what we can offer them. And the good thing about Orion is the fact that we have so many guys that are law enforcement veterans. We can speak to the law enforcement guys on their terms, whereas, in the past, like they've gone to, special operations veterans run companies, and the soft guys are like, this is how we did a raid in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. And, law enforcement guys are like, cool, but we don't do explosive breaching. We can't just throw flashbangs, into every single space whenever we want. Like, there's a lot of things that don't really transfer over. Doing a military raid in a foreign country to doing a law enforcement raid, here in CONUS. So there's a lot of things that are lost, and then those departments are left kind of going back and like trying to interpret the information that they got and like figure out like what can we use, what can we not. Like, that ended up just kind of being like a really expensive, cool couple days with these special operators.
Yeah.
I think that's one reason that Orion is growing so fast. I
think it's good to hear that these departments are reaching out, and even on the individual level, going, you know what, I may not be doing this the best way possible. Let's seek out some extra information, see how other people are doing it, and see what we can improve on. There's after 2020 and all the hate on police and stuff like that, people were trying to defund them and shit. And it's like, that's really the opposite effect. We need to have more funding so that they can get training and that there can be better handled situations because they've seen it before in training, or we've plussed up the force so that you have guys that do specific stuff like mental health stuff while other guys are doing the actual, like, having to go hands on with people and things like that. So I think it's really good to hear that there are agencies out there that are seeking out more information and stuff. What you hope as, a civilian, hearing that agencies are getting better training, getting more training and stuff like that, is they don't do what like the Uvalde police guys did and be fully trained and then just not utilize it, like hesitating in the moment. And I wasn't there and I don't know the full details about it, but obviously that didn't go well. And luckily there was some BORTAC agents there who are also highly trained, guys that kind of took care of that situation. I don't know. What's your take on that, man? When you have a force like that where they're trained, there was, the Uvalde SWAT team and stuff, they're trained on school shootings and stuff, but they didn't execute like they were probably trained.
Yeah, man. I mean, the big thing about that, right, is like we all want our answers now. We're not going to know enough for months to understand exactly what happened. Obviously, what we do know right now is that they absolutely did not do what they should have done. Everybody knows since Columbine that, like, if there's a shooter in a school, you go in and you hunt the shooter. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a lone patrol officer and you're the first on scene, or you're the entire SWAT team. Like, you go in and you go after the shooter, because if you don't go after the shooter, they have freedom of movement to continue, doing their evil. And they didn't do that, and instead they spent most of their energy detaining the parents that were trying to charge,
which is crazy,
to solve the situation. I know there was something about, like, I don't know if it was the BORTAC guys or anybody else that, like, they stacked in the classroom, but they didn't breach it, and they were waiting for a master key because they thought the shooter was contained at that point. Like, I don't know everything, and I haven't really been trying to dig into it because I know I'm just going to end up getting a lot of the same information, and I'm going to end up getting a lot of political rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just sitting back, and I'm waiting for investigations to happen and information to be released to the public. But I know that for sure, like, a lot of people did not do the job that they should have done that day. So it's unfortunate. And I think all the more reason that people need to be demanding, instead of defunding, like, more accountability and more training for our law enforcement officers. I mean, you get instances continuously, you're concerned about the level of force that an officer uses. Well, if you take someone who has the bare minimum of training to say, yes, you are authorized to carry this firearm, and they only qual with it once a year, they don't know how to fight, they're not taught actual techniques to de-escalate a situation or use their hands, how to use all the tools they have on their belt, and to do it to a level that they know they're a dangerous person, so they have the confidence to deal with the situation. That's where they kind of skip a bunch of steps and they go straight to pulling out their sidearm, and then they start firing, and that's where you get all these stories where, the officers are discharging like a dozen rounds and the suspect is struck with, 50% of those. And then the suspect ends up still living, one, because pistol rounds aren't all that inherently lethal, but then their shot placement was crap.
Yeah. I was talking to my buddy that's... Go ahead.
Yeah, I see. It's just, we don't train our law enforcement officers well enough.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing because it comes from, local government and law enforcement administration who don't want to spend a lot of money and want to assume less risk. But in doing so, you end up putting below average, really trained people on the streets, or you're actually assuming more risk because you're not taking the time to train and educate them to where they are competent, confident, and controlled dangerous people. And you end up, I guess it's easier to pay off lawsuits in the millions rather than spending that to train the officers in the first place. So no, it's a tough situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of an easily solved one too. And unfortunately, what it's coming down to right now is it's the individual officers are seeking our training. I had a guy drive up from Florida twice to come take class with me. I mean, there's clearly a lot of really good officers that are willing to use their own money and time. It would be really nice to see these agencies and the local and state governments that fund them and support them to push that training and, develop. And there's also the cultural thing too. Like if we keep vilifying a profession, well, you're not going to get good people in the profession.
Mm-hmm.
Keep making everyone think that cops are evil, then you don't get like a lot of really good people in there because they don't want to be considered the bad guys.
Yeah.
So even though they might want to really be law enforcement, want to really be a cop or a deputy, they don't go out for it because they don't want to be associated with all the nasty rhetoric that people associate the profession with. And so you end up with like this other group of people that just create more problems for you. And it's like this vicious cycle that they put themselves in.
Yeah, no, you're right there, man. I think it's definitely nearsighted to be like, well, we're going to cut the funding because we don't think, they're whatever. You got to look, if you want quality individuals, it has to be like quality pay. You have to give, you talk to a lot of law enforcement people and their forces are so small because of cutbacks or whatever, or recruitment or whatever, that a lot of them don't even really have the time to go do extra training because it's like they're constantly working because their force is so spread so thin that there's not really time to go do extra training. They're just on the streets living it every day, and you're right. There's good cops. There's bad cops. It's like, it's such a tough gig. I used to want to be one. Like when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, I'll join the military, then I'll get out and I'll become a police officer and it'll be super cool, because I think in someone's mind like mine, it's like, hey, I just want to do good things. I want to help people out. There's got to be some good in the world countering the bad. And unfortunately, that's not always the case with some officers and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. It's a weird thing. For me, I don't like the idea of having any kind of like national police like standard or something like that because we're so different. Every area is so different. I'm sure you've seen it working with multiple different agencies. The way they conduct themselves are going to be different because someone that lives in rural East Texas, their law enforcement guys are going to be different than the police officers here in, the city of San Diego. It's just the nature of the beast,
I mean, there's some very basic things, right, that you could say, nationally, like shooting standards.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, here's like national pistol standard, the national rifle standard. And there's nothing saying that, a department can't go like one up from there. So if it's the pistol and let's just say it's a 50 round qual and the national standard is like a 35 out of 50, nothing stopping an individual department or state from saying like, you know what, we want our officers to be a little bit more trained, so we're going to spend the time, and we're going to say the minimum score is 45 out of 50. Right? I mean, that's doable, and I know there are some federal standards. But again, I'm not, law enforcement. I'm kind of out of it. I'm
same, yeah.
Goes into it working with Orion, so I don't know all the ins and outs. And those guys can talk to it way, way, way better than I can. It's just a frustrating situation because it's so easily solvable. But just, a lot of people don't. And then you get a lot of the individual officers who just kind of like shrug their shoulders like, like, why should I care? And it's the same thing in military. Guys are like, well, why should I care if the people who are in charge of me don't care?
Mm-hmm.
So you get people who don't go out and push themselves. And that's one of the things that Orion is always pushing. It's like, you've got your stuff, like, go do a workout in your patrol gear, go do dry practice with your stuff, whatever your duty weapons are, instead of just waiting for qual day to come around. I did a joint op with the sheriff's department some years back, and we're on their range, and the guy's like, yeah, we got tons of ammo. Like, you could come out and you could shoot 500 rounds every single day, and we would continue to be able to support it. I'm like, oh man, that'd be awesome to work for this department. Like, you must have people out here all the time. They're like, no. They're like, guys will show up like 2 days before their annual qual, and they'll ask us for some coaching, and they'll shoot, they'll shoot the qual, right? They'll shoot the qual as a practice a couple times, and then they'll come back and they'll do their official qual, and then you don't see them again for a year.
That's crazy. I love shooting, so I think that'd be awesome. Like, yeah, come out. Fuck yeah, man.
I mean, yeah, and again, it's like one of those things. It's difficult, because you have to balance your time, especially if you're a family man or a family woman. But
yeah, for sure. Like we said, with spread thin, yeah, it's tough.
But if you're in a profession where you're armed, you have responsibility to yourself, your family, your department, your community. That, like, you should be proficient with all of your tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's for sure.
Yeah, we're entrusting those people with a lot of responsibility. They have a lot of power, and with that comes the responsibility on their end to be proficient, be professionals. And, we talk a lot about training and shooting and CQB and stuff like that. They also need to learn how to, like, interact with the public if they're not very good at it. Like, how do I sit here and have an interaction with people without escalating it and stuff like that? That ongoing training there, so that you never even have to go to the gun. So it's a weird world, man.
That's not the sexy stuff that sells online and all that. So it's hard to get people to, like, really engage in that.
Mm-hmm. There's one guy, there's a police officer I've been following for a couple of years now. I think his name is Oh No, It's the Popo. And he goes out and does, like, community engagement constantly. Like, he's out doing TikTok dances with the kids or playing basketball or whatever. And his Instagram page is, like, kind of blown up, and he's, like, known in the community. And it's like, that's nothing but positive stuff, man. You're seeing, like, you're humanizing these people, because if you have no, kind of like with the military, if you're Joe Schmo civilian, if you have no kind of relation to the military or police or whatever, no family members or anything, they kind of look like the others. Like, those are people of power that you can't really relate to, and you don't really understand them. The stuff that, like, he's doing humanizes the job and kind of shows that, like, hey, we're not here just to, like, arrest people or ruin people, or, give out tickets. I'm just trying to make the neighborhood a better neighborhood. I just want it to be a good place for the kids to grow up and stuff. So yeah, man. I say let's end it on that, man. Thanks again for coming on the podcast. If you want to go ahead and throw out all your social media and websites and stuff, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the main page is Blakewater0326. That's the main page, and then the business page is a mouthful. It's Maneuver Training Solutions _LLC. And that is the name of my company, Maneuver Training Solutions LLC. So if you type that into a search engine like Google, that should be one of the top results. It should pop up. The website's maneuvertrainingsolutionsllc.com. So if you're in the Camp Lejeune area and you're looking for training, I host firearms courses locally. And for anyone who wants more than just firearms, or they're not in the Lejeune area, go to oriontraininggroup.com or lc.com. But you type in Orion Training Group, the site will pop up. And Orion, we've got classes across the United States, primarily right now around the Louisiana and East Texas areas. We got facilities opening up in North Carolina, though, and South Carolina, and we're going to continue to expand. And that's classes in firearms, tactics, communications, medicine, and we're just going to continue to kind of expand our course catalog. So definitely looking at that if you're looking for training. That pretty much covers it, I think.
That's it, man. That's great stuff. I appreciate it. Everybody can check out my Instagram. It's @FormerActionGuys and @FormerActionNews. My website is jkramergraphics.com. Check that out. Pick up a sticker or something, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.